Coming up on 60 Minutes.
Nothing will stop me from keeping my word.
Donald Trump 2.0.
Nobody can out-Trump Trump.
To the victor go the spoils.
He was president before, and the world didn't end.
We're in a brave new world.
But what does his win mean for Australia?
Trump prides himself on being unpredictable.
What a campaign. What an election. What a result. To the victor, Donald Trump, go the spoils. From early next year, he'll return to the White House for another 4 years as the most powerful man on earth. And for someone with such an unpredictable and egotistical nature, that old saying, we live in interesting times, couldn't be more apt. But now that we've had a few days to process Trump's extraordinary and impressive resurrection, it's time to seriously consider the impacts his return to the Oval Office will have for Australia and the rest of the world. So here we are in Washington, DC. We're actually set up in my hotel room. It's 9 o'clock at night here, and we've just gotten back from a long drive from out of New York, about 5 hours from here.
Yeah, West Point.
West Point, where we interviewed one of our key talent, Republican pollster, Frank Luntz, and he's fascinating. I mean, I found him to be quite dejected because while he's conservative, he was a staunch anti-Trumper. But he wasn't surprised by the election result.
No, he wasn't surprised at all by the election results, and we spoke to him a few months ago. And
he was really worried when we first spoke to him.
He was worried. And I mean, you know, even today he brought up that he was thinking about moving to England.
Yeah.
And he's now no longer
If
doing
Trump
that.
won,
Yeah.
he was going to flee the country.
Yeah. And I mean, Trump has had a majority victory. But he was really good. I think he, spoke what we're all thinking in regards to, you know, a lot of people can't believe this result in regards to, you know, there's a second, Trump administration about to come in.
He explained really well, I think, why the majority of Americans have chosen Donald Trump, which is something a lot of people back home perhaps don't understand or around the world are struggling with. And that is because Americans have been so disappointed with the last 4 years. Yes, there were issues in the first Trump presidency. A lot of people don't like him. They don't like his personality. They don't like the way he talks, the way he acts, the way he treats women. However, the last 4 years, clearly the majority of this country feel like they've had promises made and broken.
Yeah.
And they haven't been represented by the Democrats.
No, they haven't been represented by the Democrats. And I think that, you know, a lot of people were talking about, you know, abortion rights, border, immigration. But I think at the end of the day, it's come down to the fact that it's all got to do with hip pocket. And I think a lot of Americans feel that, you know, when they're going out and doing their groceries, things are a lot more expensive.
Well, that's a key point. And we've been hearing that. I mean, we were in Pennsylvania 2 months ago on another assignment for 60 Minutes. And I can remember the driver saying to us, she had 4 kids, 3 jobs. She was driving me to Philadelphia Airport, and she said, I can't afford to feed my kids.
Yeah.
And she said, I don't like the person Trump is. I don't like the way he talks about women. I don't like really his approach to reproductive rights.
Yes.
But, and there's that but, life felt easier and was better 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So Trump, you know, that's what's got him over the line. Frank Luntz was really interesting on that. We should go back, though, and just fill people in on the week that's been, because we're nearly at the end. Nearly, not quite. Got a bit of work to do yet.
Nearly there.
Of this very long election week. And election day, I guess, was a big one for us. Our 60 Minutes crew was part of the network coverage. And so we went into the White House grounds at what?
About 2 o'clock
2 p.m.? Yeah.
Went in there, which is in itself is a bit of a rigmarole to get in.
It's a process. Yeah.
But that in itself was very interesting. I mean, you know, I spent a bit of time there in 2020 at the end of the election, just before it was called. And the vibe was very different.
Yeah, wasn't it?
You know, you didn't have any of your top, US networks there. Most of it was international.
Yeah, it was too. And actually, you know, I was there on election night 4 years ago, and you're right, it was completely different because, of course, the current president is not in this race. So it felt quiet.
Yeah, I mean, Biden was home.
Yes, he was, so we're told.
And it was funny, you know, I picked up on it, and so did our cameraman Jack. As the results started coming in, you started seeing lights go off inside, and obviously, you know,
I felt like there was a bit of a buzz for the first few hours we were there. And then, as you said, it got dark. And then, you know, those results from the key states to start to come in later in the night, sort of 9, 10 p.m. local time.
Yeah.
And then it got sort of quite...
Yeah, the vibe, the energy very much changed.
Yeah. So we were there for a good, 12 hours? We were there till nearly 2 a.m.
Yes.
With all our snacks, of course.
Yeah,
took in a big bag of snacks.
Yes, because unfortunately we couldn't get out to get any food.
I know. Well, I used to be able to actually order, this is a fun fact, you used to be able to order Uber Eats to the White House, but I don't know if they changed the security or...
Well, that's an interesting point. So around Washington... in the days leading up to the election, obviously, they put up a lot of barriers. You know, one of our 9 network correspondents tried to get into a CVS but thought it was under construction because it was all boarded up. And I think, you know, outside the White House in itself, they're doing a lot of construction for inauguration, which is, you know, a few months away.
Yeah.
I think that's also been a little bit of a deterrent,
yes.
You know, all the fencing so that no one can gather in Lafayette Park.
Well, that's right, because there were fears that there would be unrest
yes.
if it was going to be very quiet. And this isn't, if it was going to be very close, I should say, which is another thing we should talk about because the polls, I don't want to say the polls were wrong, but they certainly weren't spot on. I mean, it was not on a knife's edge.
No, it wasn't.
And that is something that I think a lot of Americans we've spoken to, like Frank Luntz, who understand why Trump won, but they were still surprised by the extent of the swing towards him.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well is, you know, last election back in 2020, it took, you know, a few days for us to actually have, you know, somewhat of a final verdict. Whereas this happened, you know, you were seeing on the night the numbers going up quite quickly.
Yeah.
And now the map is pretty much
red. So we watched Trump's victory speech, which was, like 2:30 in the morning, I think?
Yes.
When we got back to the hotel.
We both hopped in bed.
Yeah. And then it was only a few hours later that we got up with our crew and we had our first interview for the show, for the story, with Charles Adele. And he works at a think tank here in Washington, the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. And he's the Australia chair. So his role, just so people know when they're watching the story, is really important in terms of he spends a lot of time at the White House. He works really closely with the Biden-Harris administration.
Maybe like a consulting kind of role.
Yeah. But he also spends a lot of time in Canberra.
Yes.
And he works really closely with government ministers in the Albanese government on things like trade and security and defence. So he's right in that space. He's an expert, for example, on all things AUKUS. And he was pretty dejected when we saw him early on the day after election.
We had an interview with him with a role at 10:45 in the morning, and he had stayed up until I think 3 a.m. So he was coming into us on pretty little sleep.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think he's,
it was all sinking in.
Yeah. That's totally the right way to put it. I met him in the lobby and he seemed a bit down. And that's another also interesting thing to say. I got up in the morning the day after and I went for a little bit of a walk. And you could kind of, tell the vibe was a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean,
in DC.
And we know how Washington, D.C. voted. It's a very democratic city.
Yes.
So that was to be expected.
We picked up on that when obviously, we first met Charles.
Yeah. He had some really interesting things to say about what a Trump 2.0 presidency means for the world, which is what, I mean, I've certainly got so many messages and feedback from back home since Trump's victory as to like what happens now. I think there's a lot of quite inflammatory rhetoric, quite frankly, around like, could this be World War III?
Yes.
I mean, some of that's not unreasonable because Trump himself has very inflammatory rhetoric and he has threatened to pull out of NATO, for example. He's long criticised that alliance. He said he's going to end the Ukraine war on day one.
How that will happen, we don't really know.
And I mean, we put that to Charles, actually. What does his foreign policy look like? What could it mean?
Back to the point in regards to NATO, Frank actually said that he has friends within the State Department and he said that will be something that will not happen,
Yeah, he was comforting, actually. He was reassuring on that, Frank Luntz.
Yes.
He said he thinks that Trump would not ultimately withdraw from the alliance, which of course would be a disaster for Europe. But in terms of Ukraine, and Charles Adele was pretty adamant as well that ultimately we don't know what Trump will do because he hasn't given detail and he's an extremely unpredictable character.
Yeah, and I think the thing is with Trump, he's very much said, during this campaign that it's all about America first. What that means for, the world and allies, we're not really sure yet. I think it will take a bit of time for it to settle in as well that, Trump is going to be the commander-in-chief and what that looks like.
Yeah. And look, everyone's going to work with him. We've seen that. Anthony Albanese came out straight away saying they'll have a good relationship, and of course they will. Charles did say to us, on the inside, of course they are worried.
Yes.
Because they don't know what the future is for any of those deals. And obviously we talk about AUKUS in the story, which is buying 3 nuclear submarines over the next few years from America.
And whether or not those, the submarines, when they first start, obviously come off, the finish line, will they be given to us as part of this deal, or will America keep them?
Well, he's an isolationist. He's America first. So those things are all in question. But as Charles pointed out, Trump does love a good deal. And he loves to appear strong.
Businessman,
militarily as well.
Yeah.
So that all works in Australia's favour. So after the week that's been, and we've still got a bit of work to do, what would your key takeaways be? I actually feel like last week when we were not in Washington, we were on assignment on a different 60 Minutes story, nothing to do with politics in New Orleans. Gave me a really interesting flavour of where this election was headed.
Yeah. My takeaway of it, though, would be, I think, having been here, in the days after the election, I feel like America has, kind of accepted it that Trump is going to be the next president.
Well, and it was such a clear majority, as you said.
Yeah, but I feel like when you are, looking at international newspaper headlines, I think the rest of the world is still, coming to terms with that.
Yeah.
A lot of commentary on, CNN, Fox as well has all been like, this is what America wanted.
Yes.
Voted for this. This is a democracy.
This is our choice.
We need to move forward. And I think, the world will have to obviously come on board. Otherwise it will be, a place where America, is isolated. And at the end of the day, I guess, we all need to have America as on our side.
And playing a strong, role in the world order as well. I think my takeaway would be that the concern over abortion, women's rights, the criminal cases, the convictions that Trump already has, and the charges that he still has against him, the concern around immigration even, those things were not enough to Trump, pardon the pun, the economic struggles that people across America have been feeling.
Yes.
And somehow this figure who, so many people have been saying for so many years is so divisive has actually united a lot of Americans in their frustration, in their anger that they have been ignored and even sort of disrespected for the past 4 years.
Yeah, it's funny. Frank actually puts it a really good way. He says, Trump comes along with a lot of baggage that America has avoided and, kind of turned a blind eye to all of that. And, he, at the end of the day, through his grievances, actually is the one person who, speaks to what America needs. And, I guess that's why we're where we're at right now.
And look, whatever you think of him or the result, it is the most extraordinary political comeback of our time.
Yep, 2 attempted assassination attempts.
Yeah.
Pretty
twice impeached.
Yeah, and towards the end of his campaign, he was unraveling a little bit. You know.
Yet again, the Trump show rolls on, and he's caught so many people off guard, and we don't know. We really don't know what the next 4 years will look like. But I guess I felt some hope today, particularly, and I did speaking to Charles Edel as well. He was positive on the fact that the country does need to move forward.
Yeah.
And Frank said today, maybe Trump can listen to people around him.
Yeah.
Maybe he can take this mandate and use it for good.
Yes, unite everyone.
Yeah. So we've still got a bit of work to do. We have to film a piece to camera for our story. We will be hosting the show from Washington this weekend, so we'll be filming a big intro there. We better get on the phone to Sydney and see if they like our script, which we wrote in the car on the long drive back from New York.
Very little, poor internet.
Yeah, but it's been a big week, Nichola.
Whirlwind.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for
Amelia.
coming on the Extra Minutes on the Road podcast.
Thank you for having me in your hotel room.
Always, anytime.